Hi everyone, this is Linska Adventurer and my name is Lindsay and we are adventuring through another Bible story again today, just like we do every single Friday. So today we're just going to jump straight into it. We are looking at Exodus chapter 1. And this is a part of the story in Exodus where Moses isn't on the scene yet. Not everyone really remembers that there is a part before Moses comes onto the scene, but there is. And let's have a look at what was going on there. So there are actually two different parts of the Bible that we're going to look at. We're going to look at Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 to 22 especially, I think. And also Proverbs 11 verse 13. So I was reading through Proverbs the other night. It's kind of like my go-to book in the Bible. I always, since I was a kid, have always really seen Proverbs as a really important part of my life. I always wanted to gain more wisdom. Some people might view me as a type of personality who might be a little bit airy-fairy, a little bit, just living in the here and now in life, but at the same time there's this part of my personality that just really wants to know more and to be wiser and to just always live the best kind of life possible. And so I feel like Proverbs is full of a lot of good stuff to say, and when I don't know where else to read in the Bible, I'll just jump into any part of Proverbs and see what it's saying. And so I was reading through there, and a part that I've actually underlined before, caught my eye. That's why we underline things. And sometimes you underline something and you don't even remember what the context was when you underlined it. And so for me, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder why I cared so much about this verse before. And so I had to read through it. And there was a few around it that I'd underlined it, but this is the one that really stood out to me the other night. And it says, "A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter." So that's kind of interesting. We'll probably circle back to that verse down the track a bit, but it really does tie in very well with this story in Exodus chapter 1. So let's have a look what's going on. Basically, the backstory in Exodus chapter 1 is, it starts off in the first couple of verses saying, this is the names of the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob who were now living in Egypt. So we know that Joseph was sent off to Egypt as a slave, and then he became the prime minister. He's like second in charge of basically the entire world at this point. And then after a few years of being in charge, his family come to live there as well, and they live happily ever after in the land of Egypt, in the best part of the land. And so there's these Canaanite, well, they're not really Canaanite, but they're like these people who were living in the land of Canaan. These are the chosen people from God, now living in the land of Egypt, which is a very different kind of spiritual atmosphere, cultural atmosphere. Like, it's very different. And they're living together, sharing the same space together, but they're two separate entities. And so the first couple of verses say there's basically 70 descendants of Jacob who turn up to Egypt, and then after that generation who kind of moved across, once they've all died, so Jacob, Joseph, all his brothers, their kids, maybe grandkids, once they die, there's no one really named for the next 400 years in this time period. It just says there were 70 of them, and then basically we know from a lot of historians looking closely at this, 400 years later there's 2 to 5 million of them, but there's nobody really named in this time. And names are actually super important. When you look at the Bible, because a lot of the way the Bible was written it wasn't written originally, it was told as stories. And so when you tell a story, the things that you include and the things that you leave out are really important to take notice of. People's names and their meanings in the Bible especially are really important, because somebody might have been born with like a pretty boring name, but because of what they did or their character that they displayed in the story, that will determine kind of what people would call them over the generations after that. So they could be called Bob at birth, but then they could be called something really beautiful and wonderful or masculine or mighty or something like that in the stories that's told about them down the generations. So you forget that he was ever called Bob, and now he's got this really cool name instead that means something really wonderful. Yeah. So, yeah, basically, what we see here is nobody is named since Jacob and Joseph till the time of the Exodus really getting started. And now during this time, there is a Pharaoh who rises to power, and he doesn't know about Joseph, which at first thought, like, how can you not know about Joseph? Joseph is the coolest, right? Like, how can there be a leader of this country and he not know his own country's history? So a few hundred years down the track, there's this guy in charge, and even though it was like his granddad's best mate in office, he doesn't know about him. He doesn't know about all the cool things that happened, the way that God blessed his nation, brought the world to its knees, brought the world to Egypt. Basically through this famine and like through everything that happened, basically. Doesn't know about this wonderful God of Joseph. And so, like, how can a Pharaoh not know about these things? Like, any other political leader has to know their country's history. Otherwise, like, they're just going to repeat history or they're going to do things wrong. Like, we know that, yeah, every politician should be really good at understanding history and warfare and how everything works together. And so to not know about this one guy, Joseph, and what happened there is really strange to me. But if we think about it, we know from history that there was a Pharaoh around about the time of Joseph who actually changed religions, and he changed to follow this one God. And then a little while later he was killed, and then the next Pharaoh went back to the original traditional worship of, the Egyptian gods and the whole pantheon. So there's this idea that, I guess, this Pharaoh who knew Joseph, maybe was the Pharaoh who worked alongside Joseph or something like that, believed in the God of Israel, perhaps started following that God for a while, and then when his time was up, then the next generation didn't continue that because they didn't have that personal connection. And there's, if you look at Egyptian stuff, you know that the priests and the scribes really ran the show. They held a lot of power. The way that they had their religion influence the beliefs in the country, they just really were an integral part of the culture. And Egyptians don't like change either, or ancient Egyptians really didn't like change. That was a huge no-no. We can't upset the way that things are. And so I could imagine that when this new religion comes on the scene, there's this whole new other people coming in. They are a minority, but they're starting to grow and they're not looking so much like a minority anymore. I can imagine that the priests who, are part of the temple of Ra and Horus and Isis and all these different Egyptian gods and goddesses are no longer getting as much attention, and therefore less wealth through less offerings or less, participation in their religious activities. And they're losing power, and they also happen to have a lot of, influence over the education system. And there was actually a school for all the nobility, all the children of the sons, I guess, of the nobility to attend to learn about things like politics and religion and warfare and, how to read and write and swim and all sorts of different things. But yeah, so these religious leaders from the Egyptian perspective would have their own agenda to not tell the story of Joseph and Joseph's God and what happened. They would have perhaps deliberately left out that piece of information that very pivotal part of history, so that the future king would favor them and continue placing them in a position of power. Yeah, so if we keep that in mind, we can see that if we actually look beyond that, so these priests of these various different gods of Egypt are obviously like, these other gods aren't real. Like there's Satan and there's God. Well, God and Satan. Satan's not a god. He wishes he could be. We see that throughout the Bible. Yeah, but he's got this whole agenda. He knows the ultimate plan of salvation. He was in the garden, as the snake. He saw the sacrifice and the promise to Adam and Eve that, there'll be somebody, a redeemer down the line, who, will destroy Satan's hold over the planet that you've just kind of handed to him. And so Satan is working behind the scenes throughout Earth's history and doing his very best to destroy any opportunity for his reign to be taken away from him. He knows that that is the plan, but he's got all these humans that he's working with and trying to manipulate, so that he can stay in power forever and ever. And so we see the priests have their agenda, but behind that it's actually Satan's agenda to influence the Pharaoh, to influence the influencers, the people in power in the nation. And so over time, through society, through, the way people work together, through people's own desires and wants, and selfishness, really, he manages to get the Pharaoh into this mindset where he doesn't care about the Israelite God. He doesn't know anything about Joseph or what good he's done. And he just sees this group of Israelites as a threat. And especially now, because God is blessing them and making them grow quite a lot. It says that the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. And it says this in a variety of slightly different wording 3 times throughout this first chapter. And when you see something repeated like this, you've got to take notice. It's important. So, this king of Egypt, this Pharaoh, he is seeing this threat, and now he feels like he needs to do something. And also from a political perspective, a new Pharaoh, a new guy in charge, will typically want to pick on a minority group just so that they can bring more, national pride and, bring a lot more unity through hating another group of people. That happens a lot throughout any political sort of institution in the world. So this Pharaoh is like, all right, I'm going to get more supporters for me, and I'm going to get rid of these, potentially bad people who might turn against us, might join like the Hittites if they come to overthrow us or something like that. And so what they do first is they try to, they enslave them. Like, these are citizens kind of who have been living in the land peacefully for a couple of 100 years maybe, 1 or 2. And at this point, they become enslaved. They're just like, they live here, but now they're forced to do all the hard stuff for the Egyptians. They build cities, they do a lot of hard manual labor. But because of that, the Israelites are just reproducing a bunch more. Like, what else are you going to do for fun when you're, in the fields all day working super hard? Like, there's not a lot of downtime. And so what downtime you do get, you're going to reproduce a whole bunch in that way. So what the Egyptians do to slow down their reproduction is actually making it go even faster than it was before. And so they're like, all right, we've got to try something new. What's phase 2 in our plan to destroy this non-Egyptian group of people who are a threat to us, we think. And so what they do next is the Pharaoh himself talks to these 2 women, and their names are Shiphra and Puah. So Shiphra, we'll just quickly look at their names. Shiphra means beauty, and Puah means splendor or fragrance, something along those lines. And so the king speaks to them because they're the midwives to the Hebrew women. We can very much assume that they are Hebrew themselves, just by everything that's told to us about them, except for that one thing. It doesn't say they are Hebrew, it just, it says they fear God and they are helping out the Hebrew women give birth. Okay, so I have actually another point about, the spiritual warfare that's happening. Basically, I see it's actually Satan getting freaked out by the fact that this Israelite, group of people are beginning to explode in growth, and they're becoming like a threat. They're becoming a larger group of people because he knows back from the Garden of Eden and through, watching all the different covenants along the way that it's Abraham and his descendants through, Isaac and then Jacob, and then from there on, especially through Judah at this point, that this Messiah that is promised to overthrow his rule is coming through this group of people. And so he's focusing on this family. He's got his fingers in every other pie around the world to destroy people's lives and, make people miserable and hopefully God miserable in the process. But yeah, so he's zoomed in on this Israelite family. He's like, oh no, they're becoming big and strong, and what am I going to do about it? I need to kill them off so that they don't kind of kill me off in the process. And so, yeah, especially, I was actually questioning, there's this one verse, and it says that, all right, now that we're about to see Pharaoh chat to the midwives, he tells them to, when you see the Hebrew women giving birth, if it is a son, then you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, then she shall live. And I was like, why not just kill all the babies? Like, from the Pharaoh's perspective, what is it about the boys specifically that is an issue? And so I had to really think about it, and then, looking at it from a cultural perspective, a Hebrew perspective especially, or any culture back in those days especially, they didn't place a lot of value on women or girls. They were just somebody who would marry into a family. They were not the ones, it wasn't a matriarchal line, it was a patriarchal line. There was, so women just were the wife and the mother, and they kind of just were expected to take on whatever family values, religion, whatever that they stepped into. So they were just the womb and the nurturer, basically. But the men, the males, the boys, they were the head of the family. And so if you get rid of all the boys from an entire generation and don't ever let another boy live in a particular family or like nation, essentially, when anyone 20 years and above or whatever who's having kids, probably younger in those days, they are only allowed to have girls and girls and girls and girls and girls. They're going to run out of boys in the next couple of years, and then there's going to be absolutely no Israelites left, girls or boys, because all the girls will just get married off into the Egyptian families or used as slaves for whatever. And there's just no more Israelite identity at all because there's no men to lead it. And so I could see how from just that cultural perspective, that is basically committing a half genocide that eventually, you run out of genetic material to work with. And then there's just absolutely no families, there's no culture left, it's just disintegrated over one generation. So I think the Egyptians were kind of taking a slower approach, but that's just me being critical. But yeah, it was also a very direct attack, and it would have worked after only a couple of years if they'd, kept it up. So we see this happening. The Egyptians want to get rid of the boys for their own genocidal reasons, but we also see, Satan doesn't want this male redeemer coming on the scene, and so he's just trying to get rid of all the boys. And this happens quite a few times. Well, at least definitely one other time in the Bible that we see, and that's when Jesus is born. We see, Herod trying to kill off all the boys in Bethlehem from the age of 2 and under, because of this very specific time period prophecy that Jesus, the Messiah, would be born. And And we can see the exact same reasons behind that. You know, Satan doesn't want the Redeemer to be born, so he's using the guy in power to get rid of all potential boys that could come on the scene to be the Redeemer. Yeah, but back in this time in Egypt, there was no prophecy of when that would happen. So Satan's just like, let's kill them all now, just in case. Like, we don't know when he's going to show up and, you know, take over. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on the spiritual warfare that's going on behind Pharaoh's actions and what he's trying to do, all his different phases of genocide. Yeah, so he's now talking to the midwives, and so their names are Splendor and Fragrance and Beauty. That's what their names mean. And we can see this as like a really nice way of describing who they are for the future generations who hear this story. These are the heroes for basically the entire world at this point, because without what they do next in the story, there would be no Israel, there would be no Messiah, and there would be no salvation for humanity. So Shiphra and Puah are super duper important, and I'm really glad that they're put in the first chapter of Exodus. It's a good job. Yeah, so what they did and did not do was really, really pivotal. They obeyed and served God before man, before Pharaoh, before the governmental mandates that were placed on them. And yeah, they did what they knew was right, and they obeyed God and they preserved life. So a little bit of a note on who these women are. So we see Pharaoh talking to them because they're the midwives, but we can't expect just 2 midwives to be, you know, helping the births of 2 to 5 million, you know, people at this point. There's like they probably would have been the leaders of a guild or like an association of Hebrew midwives. So they're the leaders. So we got the leader in charge of Egypt talking to the leader in charge of women giving birth, basically. And those who help in the process. And so they were expected to pass on the message to the other Hebrew midwives and say, all right, we're killing all the boys. And that's what Pharaoh expects them to do. I guess he's the Pharaoh, and if anyone defies him, they're going to get their head chopped off or something. So he just tells them and expects it to be done. And it's not. And so over time, he gets the reports back that there's still babies being born, there's still boys running around everywhere. What is going on? Like, you can't defy an order like that for too long without it getting out, but they did it anyway. They just didn't do the harmful thing. They just let the boys live and bless them on their way. But eventually it came back on their heads, as they probably would have expected would happen. They defied, knowing that there was going to be a question at some point, what is going on? And so I find it really interesting what they say next. At first glance, we can see what they say. Let's just read it. So they said, so the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them." Okay, so that's all that their answer was that we can see. Now, at first glance, we could think, oh, they're lying through their teeth to Pharaoh. Now, they may or may not have been. Maybe a lot of women actually in the Hebrew, department were actually extra lively and gave birth really quickly. And we can imagine this because we know in our culture today, just through science, that the more active a woman is, more physically healthy and strong and fit, typically that means that if she's giving birth, it will actually be a much quicker process, just because she's stronger, has a lot more stamina, and just things move along a lot more quickly. And now, because up to this point, for a while now, the Egyptians have been and have enslaved the Israelites as a whole, you can imagine that the the Hebrew women are doing a lot more hard manual labor than the Egyptian women are. And so, you know, my mum took, I think, like 21 hours or something like that to give birth to me. But she lives a fairly sedentary lifestyle, you know, like most people do these days. And you could imagine that the Egyptian women, you know, they were still, you know, living pretty healthy lifestyles in comparison to what we do today. But the Hebrew women back then, you know, being enslaved, you know, making bricks a lot of the time, that was their major work as just a Hebrew enslavement group of people. They're, you know, picking things up, moving heavy things, like they're constantly at the gym all day, every day. And so it's very probable, like I know people today who have given birth within a couple of hours, like 2 hours max. I've heard some really cool stories along those lines. We're not getting into that, but there is the possibility here that the Hebrew midwives are actually telling the truth, mostly, as a whole, could be. There might have been a couple who they actually did have to help and they just didn't kill them, but they didn't include that part of the story. They concealed the matter. So let's look back at this Proverbs 11 verse 13. A talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is of a faithful spirit conceals a matter. So I see here this like ethical dilemma that they're going through of, you know, we can tell the truth, but maybe just not the whole truth. Like, yeah, we are saving them, but we're not going to add that part. We're just going to tell the part of the truth that makes us look good, or, you know, not as bad as we're trying to be made out to be right now. And it says that because of what they did and what they said to Pharaoh, God actually blessed them and he gave them families. So, yeah, anyway, before we get to that, so when they were questioned, they may have told the truth, but not the whole truth. And I've actually, like, in today's culture, I've actually studied a degree, and part of my degree was some counselling skills kind of classes, some counselling ethics classes, because I studied to do chaplain work. So kind of like a mix between a counsellor and a pastor, and both of those professions are quite ethically fraught. Like there's a lot of stuff that you have to deal with and like think through, and it's a very slow process. But yeah, this particular direction that I was going in with my degree was like a bit of both, and so we discussed a lot about how yeah, there are times when, you know, if you're a counselor and you see somebody out in public who you're counseling and they come along with their best friend or whoever, somebody that they know, and they're like, oh, hey, how you going? Like you're not even supposed to show much recognition at all, because if you do, then that could indicate to this other friend person that you might be in some kind of relationship of any description, and then that person asks, you know, your client, oh, how do you guys know each other? And then just because you have indicated some kind of knowledge of this person, then it puts that kind of a secret relationship. It's a very private relationship for a lot of people. A lot of people don't want, you know, people knowing that, oh, I'm going to see counselling, then, you know, there's this whole stigma. And so we have to be very careful about even the way that we acknowledge people in public. Because then that can be questioned, and then that friend or family member can go, oh, you're seeing a counsellor, what's wrong? Like, you know, and then that client of yours might actually feel like you've broken their trust in that way. So there's a lot that you have to be careful about, even in today's sense, in certain professions and certain parts of our lives, of what you can say, what you can indicate, even just to protect somebody else's dignity or emotional state, or, you know, anything like that. And yeah, so this whole being faithful and concealing a matter, like you don't have to tell the whole truth. And in fact, sometimes telling the whole truth to the wrong person can put a lot more people in danger, whether it's yourself or innocent people who are bystanders or who are, you know, being actively targeted. Like I can't go around telling all the parents of the kids that I work with as a chaplain, oh yeah, I was chatting to your kid, or, you know, that person's kid, and they said this about your kid or about you as a parent, like that you're hitting them or something like that. I can tell the principal, maybe. I can tell the police. I can tell some other department who looks after child protection services, but that's about it. Like, I have to tell the people who need to know so that protection can come, but I can't go around just telling everyone and anyone and everyone, especially not without that kid or that client's consent. Like, you have to really hold it close, hold it in, so that the right people are protected, and only the people who need to know and who can help are in the know, and can support in a variety of different ways. And yeah, so midwifery is a helping profession, and they're there to help people be born and to have new life and to look after the mothers and, you know, just protect this life. And yet Pharaoh is asking them to do the complete opposite of what their calling in life is. And they're choosing to be faithful to God and just faithful in general to their calling, to life itself. Yeah, so they did a really good thing, and so God blessed them. And we'll look at how they blessed them. Basically, as a reward, God blessed the midwives with families and children. It says households in my translation, but it basically means husbands and kids. That's it. Now, I thought about that for a minute. I was like, oh, they didn't already have them. And somewhere along the way, I did find in one of the commentaries that it says that, yeah, midwives actually were usually in that profession because they didn't have a husband and they didn't have kids of their own. Obviously, you know, if they're in that profession, they love kids. They're not going to be like, oh, kids, keep it away from me, if they're actively, you know, going through the process of helping somebody give birth. So they want kids, they want families, and just in a cultural sense, you know, for a woman to be married is like all you could ever dream of. To raise kids is like the ultimate, you know, thing to do. It's like your wholeness as a woman is to be in this place of a wife and a mother to raise and to, you know, produce more and stuff. But these midwives weren't usually married. And it would be kind of hard to be a midwife and then also have like a husband and kids at home who are like, you know, they need a lot more stability and structure in their lives. And then you're being called at 3 a.m. to help some woman give birth for the next 20 hours or something like that. Like, there would have been a lot of odd hours, a lot of instability in a midwife's life, and yet a lot of desire for that stability. And so because of their faithfulness, because of their holding in the truth, lying to Pharaoh, but not really, like just doing what they could to help in the situation, that defiance of Pharaoh, because of everything that they did and didn't do, God blessed them, and he gave them the things that they desired the most, whether it was personally or as a societal sort of gift. And so, yeah, I think that's lovely, the way that God gives us the thing that we desire most. And he likes to give us good gifts, and he does actually reward those who are faithful to him, to their calling. Yeah, so there's like an overarching theme in this first chapter around birth. One of the commentaries I read really emphasized that this time when Israel was going from a small clan of 70 people to millions of people a few hundred years later, it was this time of being in the womb in Egypt. Like, they were not yet born. They were just this group that was kind of coming together, a few cells starting to multiply and to become this whole person, in a sense, like in a metaphorical sense. And somebody pointed out that this actually couldn't have happened in the land of Canaan, in the promised land, because Canaanites didn't have this level of racism that the Egyptians did. Egyptians thought that they were completely superior to every other race, and that every other race actually came from the dung of one of the gods. and they just sprouted up, and they were there to serve the Egyptians and just do their bidding for the rest of their days. And so they thought of themselves far superior to every other race, and they wouldn't intermarry, they wouldn't intermingle in that way. And so for God to actually bring Joseph and Jacob and their family to Egypt and to be there for 400 years to develop as a nation in amongst a group of people who they weren't at any risk of, intermingling with, picking up their religious habits from as much. And yeah, to really just be apart, to be separate, and then to be taken out in this Exodus, as we'll see in the following chapters. It's this womb, and then there's this birth, and there's just a lot of growing pains in this time when they're going through persecution, enslavement, and genocide attempts. So this whole idea of birth, saving the boys, bringing them through the midwives, and the birthing of a nation. Basically, I just want to look at this multiplication that comes up a whole bunch. I think I mentioned at the start, there's 3 times, 3 separate verses that it says that, the nation of Israel was multiplying and it was, becoming mighty. These are the 2 words that keep coming through. And this happens before the enslavement, after phase 1, where, they're being enslaved, and then after phase 2, right before Pharaoh says, all right, let's just kill all the boys, Egyptians, go kill them for me because the midwives aren't cooperating. So yeah, up until this point, there's all these things happening along the way, and yet they're continuing to multiply and become mighty. And yeah, that's a bunch of cool stuff that I got out of this this very short Bible story about these 2 ladies who just didn't do what the Pharaoh said. So enjoy. Let me know what you learnt from today's chat, and I will see you again next Friday. Bye!